Hey everybody, Dr. O here, and in this USLO, we're going to be learning about the pH scale and hydrogen ion concentration and what makes something acidic, what makes something basic or alkaline, and then learning about the conditions of acidosis and alkalosis. So nice short USLO, and let's get started. Now, earlier we talked about pH when we talked about enzymes, and we said that enzymes need to be able to function at a particular pH. Now, what is pH? Well, pH has to do with the presence of acids and bases. And acids and bases are substances that are both going to form electrolytes in water. They're going to basically dissociate in water and form ions. Now, acids are going to form ions that are going to involve a hydrogen ion and something else. And the more of these hydrogen ions we have, the more acidic something is going to be. So we could say then that acids are going to be proton donors because this hydrogen ion is just a proton, no electron, basically. There's a neutron there, but we're not too worried about it because neutrons don't bear a charge. We are concerned about the charge of that proton. So it's the hydrogen ions that are biologically reactive. So acids release these hydrogen ions. We consider them proton donors. There's actually a number of ways to define acids, and this is a couple of ways that we would do that. An example of an acid would be hydrochloric acid. The minute you put hydrochloric acid into water, it is going to immediately and powerfully and vigorously dissociate into hydrogen ions and chloride ions. Now, in the body, some important acids are going to be hydrochloric acid. We have that in our stomachs. That's important. We have acetic acid, which is a very weak acid. And then we also have this one right here, which is carbonic acid. And when we get into AMP2, we're going to be learning a lot about carbonic acid because carbonic acid is found in our blood, and it helps our blood maintain a stable pH environment. So acids, the ability to be a proton donor by way of releasing hydrogen ions. But what about bases? Well, let's have a look. Well, if somebody is releasing all of those protons, well, then somebody's got to be able to pick them up. And bases are going to be the substances that can accept those protons. They basically pick up the hydrogen ions, and the way that they do that is through these hydroxide, the creation of these hydroxide ions. So when a base dissolves in solution, it's going to undergo a reaction where it basically releases, no pun intended, where it releases these hydroxide ions. And this is what's going to be what allows it to accept the hydrogen ion. So if we have hydrogen ions in a solution and we drop in some of this sodium hydroxide, the hydroxide gets liberated from the sodium. It comes over here and it finds this hydrogen ion, and look at what it forms, a water molecule. We love that because water molecules are neutral. They're neither acidic or basic. So bases have the ability to couple up with these protons. And in the body, important bases are going to be bicarbonate ions, which will actually find a hydrogen ion and create carbonic acid. So yeah, this can go backwards and forwards and forwards and backwards, as well as ammonia. We've looked at amino acids, and I told you that amino acids involve a nitrogen and a couple of hydrogens. Well, when we break down amino acids and proteins, we end up with a lot of ammonia in the body. Ammonia doesn't like that, so it very quickly tries to turn ammonia into something else, and it does. It turns it into urea or uric acid. Those are important structures to be mindful of when we start learning about body physiology. So when we're talking about acids and bases, we have a way to measure acidity and alkalinity in the body, and we do that by way of pH. pH stands for potential hydrogen or the power of hydrogen. I've seen both of those printed. So a pH scale then tells us about the concentration of hydrogen ions in a solution. And the more hydrogen ions you have in a solution, the more acidic the solution. Now, when we look at a scale like this, we can see that it numbers from 0 to 14. And for us, going up 1 doesn't seem like a big deal. But this is a logarithmic scale, which means that each movement of 1 is actually a 10-fold difference in concentration. So that, for example, if we move from a pH of 5 to a pH of 6, we've increased our pH 10 times. 10 times in that little move, which is a lot. So let's just look at this scale. Let's see what we have here. So down here at the acidic end is where we're going to have a whole lot of hydrogens and very few of these hydroxides. And this is where we're going to see things like battery acid, stomach acid, things like that. So we're going to have a large concentration of hydrogen ions down here, making things very acidic. Now at the other end of the spectrum, we're going to have very few hydrogen ions. So drain cleaner, oven cleaner falls down here as well. Oven cleaner typically falls somewhere around here. Bleach, really nasty things. Even soap. Soap can come in with a pH of 11 or 12, which is interesting because our body actually comes in at a pH, our skin of our body comes in with a pH of 5. So yeah, that can become a problem if your soap is too harsh. But we need some degree of harshness in order to cut through the dirt that can congregate on the skin. But anyway, I digress. So down here at the alkaline end of the scale, we're going to have very little hydrogen ions, but we are going to have an abundance of hydroxide ions. So this is what we see. The different types of populations at either end of the pH scale. So like I just said, if we're talking about an acidic solution, this is going to have a high concentration of hydrogen ions, but it's going to be a low pH number. So that's going to be the scale on the left end of the spectrum. And this is typically the confusing part for a lot of students, because you think if you have a high pH, you're going to have a high number. But actually, if you have a high pH, you're going to have a low number. So the closer you get to 0, the more hydrogens you're going to have. So if I were to ask you, who is more acidic, something with a pH of 2 or something with a pH of 4? You have to stop and think about it. It's like, well, let's see. On a scale, the further left I go, the closer to 0 I go, the more acidic I go. So then that would mean a pH of 2. So that's how you would need to think about that. Now also on the scale, we're going to have a neutral region. And neutral, dead center neutral, is going to come in at 7. That's going to be neutral. Pure water falls in at a neutral pH. Technically, if you go 7.1, you've now slipped into the world of alkalinity. But relatively speaking, 7.1 is still pretty neutral. Neutral is a point at which we would say the number of hydrogen ions is going to be equal to the number of hydroxides that we have in solution. So we're neither neutralizing hydroxide ions, we're not neutralizing hydrogen ions, because both of them are equal. That is the definition of a neutral solution. And the last part of our scale is going to be the part where we're alkaline or basic, and that's going to be on the far right of the scale. And this is where we're going to have low hydrogen concentrations. But remember, we're going to have a fair number of hydroxide ions over here. So if I were to ask you which one has the higher hydrogen concentration, is it a pH of 11 or is it a pH of 12? We have to keep in mind that the further right we go on our pH scale, the fewer hydrogen ions we're going to have. So a pH of 11 would have more hydrogen ions than a pH of 12. Now pH is going to be closely controlled in the body because, like what we saw, even small changes in a pH can basically mean a huge shift in the concentration of hydrogen ions. And many physiological reactions are going to require a certain pH in order to occur. So like what we saw in the mouth, where you had one enzyme functioning in the mouth where the pH comes in at about 7.3 or 4, by the time it reaches the stomach with a pH of 2, it's no longer going to be functional. So maintaining appropriate pH in certain body regions is going to be really important. We have to closely control that. Now, when we find pH is slipping out of those bounds, we can either end up with a condition called acidosis or alkalosis. Acidosis, as the name implies, is when you have a condition where the body has become excessively acidic. And things that can lead to the body becoming very acidic are severe diarrhea, poorly controlled diabetes, kidney failure, where the blood's no longer being cleansed of certain things that are driving acidity, liver failure, where you're getting a buildup of certain things because the liver's not there to utilize certain substances and keep acidity down, and heart failure, where the blood's not able to move because the heart's not working, or cancer, where you have cells doing all kinds of crazy things. So those are things that can drive acidity. Body really has its thumb on the heartbeat of acidity, because acidity poses a greater threat to the biological system than alkalinity does. Although alkalosis is a problem in and of itself. Alkalosis is when blood and body fluids become too alkaline. And things that can cause this are respiratory diseases, or even just breathing too quickly, such as in an anxiety state, but that has a tendency to be transitory, and that's easy enough to offset. You just slow down breathing. And then you can actually reduce that sort of alkalosis. If you go into shock, then that can lead to alkalosis because of breathing happening too quickly. Certain medications have to be monitored because they can send you into an alkaline state, as does severe prolonged vomiting. So again, we become concerned with alkalosis because pH needs to be tightly controlled, because many physiological reactions aren't going to occur if pH moves outside of the expected range. So, and then things start shutting down, and that's not good. And this is the end of the rather short USLO 2.5.